All right, everyone. Thank you once again for tuning in to Hot Takes with Boss. So today I have a special treat for you all today. I have my brother, my business partner, coach, trainer, speaker extraordinaire, Kinston Henderson. I'll let him introduce himself in a minute, but we're going to be talking about something that's popular in today's culture in business, but uh, what I'm excited about Kinston for is that he is not only an expert in this topic, but he practices how to train leaders to be better at what we're going to talk about today. But before we get to the topic, I'm going to let Kinston introduce himself.
Hey, everybody. Kinston here. As my brother introduced me, just a little bit about myself. Been in HR for over 16 and a half years now. Um, coaching and developing leaders through many different aspects of HR. So from recruitment to benefits and to training and development, which is really my sweet spot, where I thrive the most in all aspects of HR. Thankfully, with all the madness that's taking place now in the world, I don't have to deal with employees in that matter of answering questions of why they can't spray Lysol on their coworkers or their boss that's coughing. So, but other than that, just love developing people, love inspiring um, and empowering people, equipping people with the right necessary tools to be their very best. So.
Good stuff. And so what I want and again, why I'm excited is because Kinston is going to help us talk through the topic of unconscious bias, also known as unconscious social cognition, implicit bias, and all these other jazzy things that the world is commenting on today. And so just as a kickoff, Kinston, what does unconscious bias mean to you?
So unconscious bias is it just really simply in simple terms is really doing things without knowing that you're doing them. And so if I could flip the turn to implicit bias real quick, example I always give as implicit is something implied but not plainly stated. And the example I give is really, I got married recently and came home from a long day of work, and I dropped my clothes on the ground to put on my relaxed clothes. And I seen out of the corner of my eye, my wife was looking at me, and she looked me up and down. It was almost like and so she implied that I better pick up those clothes. And without even saying a word, I knew what she meant. She didn't plainly state it though. So, I got the point and I made it happen. But that's really what implicit is not plainly stated, but the bias comes into what, our, I say it comes from our experiences of life. And so we make decisions based on biases, our prejudices that either are favorable or unfavorable. And so that's what we have as unconscious is decisions that we make without even knowing or thinking much about them. But we're making decisions like that every day.
Yeah, I'm glad that you pointed out that favorable and unfavorable, right? It's not a positive or a negative. And where we need to, and I believe we all need to begin at from a conversation standpoint is what are the definitions of why the biases exist? And again, I believe once we identify where that stuff comes from, we could begin to really have a conversation of understanding and not judgment. And again, me and Kinston, we grew up in the same house, but he experienced our parents differently. And what that means from an unconscious standpoint are there are some things as the youngest of 7 that he naturally does just by the way he was raised. And then me being the oldest boy, but also one of the younger siblings, I process things differently in how I navigate this world. And then what we've done up to this point comes into play, right? Me coming from a military background, as everybody else is going crazy with coronavirus and freaking out, I'm chill. Like, at least ain't nobody shooting at us. All right. And everybody buying up toilet paper for 30 people, right? And it's two of us in the household. And so it's like, all right, I've been in the woods with MREs and a little piece of toilet paper, right, and leaves, right? Like, yeah, I'm like, well, guess we gotta rub it. And, as long as we still got running water, I can clean up behind. Like, that's but based on where you are in the world, what part of the world you're coming from, what things that you're just quickly using to process information, that's what gets us in trouble. And so I think, Kenson, what do you think about people who just literally operate from that fast brain, I am who I am perspective?
Yeah. I mean, anybody who's operating from a fast brain, like I said, it's who I am and I'm not changing. They're prone to so much error. They're prone to have so many oopses and so many cleanups in aisle 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 that they need to wake up quickly, because who are they hurting in the midst of them not taking inventory, not thinking through things before they actually speak or take action? It's so funny because I can recall a time, going to OSU when we were in college, and one of those few times that we lost to a team up north. I mean, pandemonium happened to the point where, the bias was unfavorable towards people who from the team up north. And, but people took that bias too far by either flipping cars or burning couches. That's bias gone wrong. And so, but those are the people who didn't think about those actions. They didn't think about the actions before they actually took action based on those biases.
Yeah. And I think particularly from some of the biggest topics that have been out there from a bias standpoint, a lot of things that come up with organizations and we're talking about it from a very practical standpoint, right? But we both have experienced it coming from a very hurtful place as well. And I constantly tell people about the situation where I have been biased against young African-American men as if they didn't have enough people putting them in a box. But it came from an experience that I had with my wife being carjacked. And even though once upon a time, I didn't have all this gray in my beard, I was a young African-American man in Cincinnati, Ohio, at a church convention with my brother, cousins, and friends being stopped by police. Like, I remember that, like, and here I am doing the same thing to these young men who are a part of my community, but it was based on an experience, and it's a real experience for me. But what I tell people is, if you don't do the work, and you brought it up, if you don't do the work to call things out and become aware, you can, again, just navigate through life holding on to these biases. And if you do it enough times, it's a confirmation. It turns into a confirmation bias where you turn in and you do a thing and you begin rationalizing and justifying how you are, what you do, because you're not willing to do the work or believe that you could be thinking about this world differently. And just from that standpoint, kids, like, what are some of the things that you experience, or some of the things you train and help people with?
Again, every class that I do at the beginning, I'm asking them to, put their cell phones on selfie mode and look directly in the camera. And for this next hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, I want you to only search your own heart. Search and evaluate your own heart and look at every, good bias, unfavorable bias. And if it's unfavorable, if it's a bad bias, then we need to make some adjustments before this class is over with. And so just self-reflecting, because in classes, people are so quick to point or even think about another coworker who they think should be in the class instead of focusing on themselves. And so I try to put them in the seat of where they have to look at themselves. I mean,
I love that.
Because we got to, because people, if we don't, as facilitators and speakers, if we don't help them, they will not see any wrong. They will not see that that bias is in error. You know, for a long time, you know, as you included, someone for a long time, we lived on the north side, and in the Northern Lights location, there was a big West African population, you know, Somali. And for the longest, all I heard was they're bad drivers, they're bad drivers, they're bad drivers. They don't know how to drive, they don't know how to drive. And after a while, you know, I was like, nah, they're not that bad. You know, I can get through it. But in the back of my head, I'm still hearing everybody say they're bad drivers, to the point when I had my first car accident, and it happened to be a Somali. And so it confirmed the bias that was spoken to me, that was put in me. And now it confirmed it. Like, I'm like, now I'm on the bandwagon to say they all can't drive. Nobody can drive.
Yeah.
You know, and to the point until I looked at myself in the mirror and said, Kenzie, you can't put everybody in a box because you got an accident one time. It was raining. It was dark. You know, I had to think, re-go through the whole accident like that, and to say no. And I refuse to say that anymore. I refuse to allow anyone else to say that anymore, because they're part of our community.
For sure. No, that's huge, right? Like you pointed to, again, what if you had a situation where something you were treating or had anxiety around, or there was this false evidence that now appeared to be real in your life, and now you have these little breadcrumbs that all your life you've been looking, and I liken it to the monkeys in the banana tree, right? At where all the monkeys, you know, by the end of the story, there were no monkeys left that actually had the experience being shocked by the banana tree. But because there was so much social conditioning from all those other monkeys that did have the experience, right? It's us as African American men in America. Yes, civil rights happened. I have my experiences being stopped in Clantucky, aka Kentucky, and fearing and having the image of my father on Ohio Highway 23, taking my sister back to college and being pulled over by a cop for speeding, and watching my father's mannerisms, and that burned into my head of why was he at 10 and 2? Like, why didn't he make any sudden movements? Like, why? Like, I'm in the back of the car watching this, like, along with my siblings, and I'm like, and it wasn't until I started doing this self-awareness work, like, what did I just watch? And in most cases, it's what us in our community call the talk. And our parents, again, it wasn't that they probably didn't know how to have the talk, right? Because they didn't want it to be a thing. They didn't want it to be reality, that I have to teach you to survive when being pulled over, or because there are people with these biases and different things like that. And if it wasn't for friends and other people that did get the talk, that shared the talk, and different things like that, like, where would I be? Like, right, like, would I be thinking that I have just as many rights as a white peer to confront the cops, to why are you pulling me over, to questioning, and do I end up another statistic on the news because the talk didn't get directly shared with me? And I think from a very holistic approach of unconscious bias, it should not be something that's steeped in fear. It should be something steeped in full-blown education and understanding of how do we begin to have the conversation. I know you have an amazing TEDx talk around beginning to have the talk from a very macro level. So go on a little bit of that.
Yeah. So, based on my TEDx, it was created because again, everybody in this world has biases. If you're a human being, you have biases, but it's up to us to really subconsciously uh, look at them, deal with them, address them, and have uncomfortable conversations. Truly being okay to say, you know what, I don't know if this is borderline this or if this is something, but asking the question, being curious to ask the question. For example, you know, because the premise is being able to have uncomfortable conversations in an environment, a healthy environment.
Mhm.
And three things have to be in the environment for it to be well: respect, empathy, and maturity.
Mm.
That's the ways that you can have a so uncomfortable conversation. For example, what you just brought up as far as the 10 and 2, to our listeners, to the listeners who are white, American, um, have the conversation of, what do you mean you have to hold your hands at 10 and 2 when you get pulled over by a cop? So that way we can share the experience with you, our
Mm.
experience with you. You can empathize with us, you can respect us, and be mature enough to hear it, be mature enough to listen, and not just say no, that doesn't happen, or it no, you don't have to do that. My cousin is this, my cousin is that. But again, you haven't lived our life,
Yeah,
and you shouldn't try to tell us or try to convince us of our lived experiences.
for sure. For sure.
but
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
but now I'm just saying, but again, the TEDx is about, again, fostering uncomfortable conversations
Yeah.
in a way that true, you know, true, success can happen, um, if we let it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, what else comes up for me as you explain that RIM model of respect, empathy, and maturity, it also comes to being respectful of trying to understand the types of social conditioning that are happening with our youth today, which is a huge thing. Like any child born after 2001 is being called Generation Z. And this generation, if we really peeled it back, they've been born into 100% chaos from day one. If
Mhm.
we go off of social media, this generation, and which in some studies extended to the end of the 90s, Generation Z being born from 98 to say now, they're now your interns in your organization. They're now your juniors and seniors in college. They're coming into the workforce where they have not known what it feels like not to have access to information. And where when we were in college undergrad, we're paying per copy. We didn't own a laptop. We went to computer labs, but they have a device from the moment they can breathe, that's at their disposal. And so they've been inundated with all this information. And so as an African American male and minority in this world today, you have access not only of your family social conditioning, but electronically being conditioned to society. And there are high levels of anxiety, and things are not only becoming unconscious anymore, they're becoming very conscious to the extent that these perceived realities are causing people anxiety,
Mhm.
and mental illness is on the rise of our youngsters. Which for me, as a leadership coach and trainer, how do we help these kids deal with the conscious and the unconscious realities that they live in?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, as for us, as for leaders, in organizations who are doing this work, is really pulling them in. Taking them in under our wings as mentees, and establishing a mentorship program to
Yeah.
help develop them. to help them see, and this is where it goes to the transfer of not power, but the transfer of information, transfer of education, to make sure that we're giving them the tools, equipping them with the tools to be successful when everything is again at their hands. You're right.
Yeah.
And they're at their hands, but it's all around. Every
Yeah.
social media brings a different aspect to it, to the
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah. So if you had, Kinston, if you have a new leader, or you had somebody out there that's trying to approach and begin to have very conscious conversations, as pertains to something like implicit bias, unconscious bias, um, what do you recommend people do?
Yeah. So if I have a young leader,
Period. It could be
okay, just
young, it could be old, it could be
yeah,
inexperienced, right?
okay, yeah, is I will simply we will first have a one-on-one conversation, and lay it out on the table. Again, doing what we just did is going through very um very, I don't want to say remedial, but about breaking it down what implicit bias is and unconscious bias is, and then how have they seen it in their careers? How have they seen it in their lives, their personal lives? How have they seen it in their community?
Mm.
What decisions have they made as it relates to, if it's in our world of HR, what decisions have they made based on, them hiring people,
Yeah.
recruitment. I when we do workshops, we talk to recruiters about the decisions that they make on their candidates, because those biases come into play
Hmm.
when they're making those decisions, right? One
Yeah.
quick example could be me going to the Ohio State University, and I receive a resume for someone who's from the team up north, Michigan. Um, there could be a toss up of, if I don't check my bias, where I'm like, he went to the team up north, resume to the side.
Yeah.
Um, but because I'm conscious and I'm aware, then I'm gonna be like, okay, let's go with the best candidate,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And so really just bringing it down, and so that leader gets it and present it in a way, package it in a way that it's not all spooky and it's not all scary and it's not
Yeah.
all uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Again, I got biases, you got bias, we all got biases, but it's what we do with them that matters, that
Yeah.
counts.
Yeah, I'm glad you kind of culminated with that statement right there, because again, at the end of the day, let's kill the elephant in the room. We all got
Yeah,
biases, and
yeah,
so nobody is immune to it. And once you understand that nobody's immune to it, you could begin to do work on whatever yours are.
yeah.
And I think when you start throwing out words like authenticity, it's in the admission of there are things that haven't been uncovered that I have a bias about. And it's not until I'm introduced to those things and
Mhm.
then somebody, and I love the way that you said it we always try to liken conversations to we need to be uncomfortable or courageous in our conversations, but there needs to be a movement towards, is it uncomfortable or necessary?
Mhm.
Right? We need to get comfortable with the idea of having necessary
Necessary.
conversations,
Yeah.
because when just saying the word out loud, uncomfortable,
Hmm.
makes you react
Yeah.
to the word, right?
Yeah.
And again, when unconscious bias and implicit bias was introduced to the world was the last election. And so who puckers up? Where do people's brains immediately go? Oh, you gonna
Race.
call me a racist?
Race.
Oh, you calling me? No, like, you okay, depending on how you make your peanut butter and jelly sandwich, if the peanut butter ain't on top when you hand it to me, I think you part devil worshiper, right? So it's
Yeah. Or put
so
butter on Pop Tarts. Do you put
putting
it?
but putting butter on Pop Tarts, right? Don't judge us. Don't
Yeah.
judge me, right? You know what I'm saying? But it's one of those things, right? That I think this topic needs to be one of those topics that we do not let die.
Yeah.
We do not take off the table.
Yeah.
And again, my wife Dupree always messing with me, talking about, yeah, I always talk about values. Well, that's where everything starts.
Yeah.
If you tell me you respect me, if you tell me you are appreciative of me, if you tell me you love work ethic and openness and all these things, if that's a business value for you, then don't tell me you don't have time to have these conversations, because they are necessary, because you have a new wave of employee, of leader coming in that has an expectation that you do this stuff well. And so, Kenson, I can't thank you enough, man, for taking a couple minutes out of your day, man, to come rap with me a little bit, and jump on the podcast and this video vlog. And so, how can people find you?
Well, it's been a pleasure. First of all, thank you for having me, bro. And no, it is a goal of mine to help, like I said, leaders and organizations have these necessary conversations. Anybody, like you said, anybody who has, diversity and inclusion, or inclusion and diversity, equity in their values, they need to call us. They need to contact us. The way people can get in contact with me is through my website, Live with Life, and that's LYFE.com. You can follow me on Facebook, Live with Life, Instagram, Live with Life. Email is kinston@livewithlife.com. But definitely let's keep having this conversation, but let's keep putting some action behind it. Leaders, it's okay to have these conversations, especially, again, we're two facilitators, speakers that will create a space where it's all good. Like we will get through it together. But to not have it, you're doing more damage.
Definitely. Yeah. And like you all, like I ended my TEDx talk in Youngstown, actions over ideas always win. And so you know where to find me, www.bossconsultingllc.net, and you can email me at lawrence@bossconsultingllc.net. And so until next time, folks, be courageous, be intentional. Have a great one, everybody.